read a lot of books. Shocker. What's wrong?
I forgot to turn.
I'll go get it.
It's like, it's kind of loud in here.
Okay. I need this to open. Perfect. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I will be doing my first book series review. So it's of the Dreamfall series by Plum. I think it's Plum, probably not Plume. Anyways. And so this is a 2-book series. So I will be reviewing both books. And I'm just gonna preface this by saying this is one of the most unique series I've ever read. So let's get right into it.
You're so mean.
I thought you said needy. I was like, so I'm just gonna give kind of a quick, no, I remember what I was gonna say. It's back now, I've got it. So as I said in my last book review, which was Of Dorothy Must Die, go check it out if you haven't watched it already. So that's the first book in a series, and I'm reviewing it because I just read it now, but there's certain series that I have started but haven't finished, and I mean like started years ago, so I don't wanna go back and review the first few books because I don't remember them great. So occasionally I will do full series reviews, which is when I have already started the first book before I started the channel. So that's kind of what's happening with this one, and there's a few more coming up that I'm just snapping through books lately. So I'm finally finishing up some series. So I'm gonna start with this one. I also said this in the Dorothy Must Die thing. I've started doing I've also said this in the Dorothy Must Die review. I've started writing down what I want to say, which just makes it so much easier to film and edit because I kind of get sidetracked. So if you see me looking down occasionally, I have my like script thing there. So I'm gonna try not to do that, but that might happen. I'm just gonna hold up the first book while I explain. Oh. He like waits till I start talking and then he like touches tin foil or plastic or something. Can I take a picture of you and then we'll like insert it into the thing? Okay. Anyways, so a quick plot for this book is that it's basically about a group of teenagers that all have insomnia, and so they join a sleep study, and they have it for various reasons. So they're all hooked up to this, they call it the tower. It's like this big piece of equipment in the middle of the room basically, and the beds are all around it. They basically like get put to sleep, and it's supposed to be studying their brainwaves, their heart, all this stuff. And there's a natural disaster while they're hooked up, and the tower ends up malfunctioning, and they all basically get put into a coma. And so what's really cool about this book is that it's from different narrator point of views. There's two of the subjects, and then also a medical intern researcher who is basically just there. You know when you're learning how to drive, if you did driver's ed and you're learning how to drive and you have to do hours where you just kind of watch other people drive, that's kind of like what this is. And so the medical student goes and is watching everything happen. The medical student's name is Jamie. That's what's cool about this book, is the different narrators. So you're seeing what's happening inside the dreams and also on the outside. So let me explain what the dreams are. Basically, when the equipment shocked them, they get put into a shared consciousness. So all the people that are in this sleep study are together and they are experiencing each other's dreams all at the same time. Basically, one by one, all of them are as a group, but they're going through each individual nightmare that everybody has. That's all I'm gonna say until the spoiler part. So I just don't wanna give anything away because there's some realizations throughout. But basically all of these characters have quite traumatic secrets, guilt, things like that, which obviously they try to hide, but that is so dumb because they're all sharing the same consciousness, so it comes out eventually. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the characters, which I've done before. I'm gonna try to be really brief about it though. So there's Jamie. Jamie goes and is observing this for observation hours, and when everything goes wrong, there is other researchers there, and they tell Jamie, you know, like, you can leave. Obviously, like, we will credit you the full hours. We don't know why this is happening. My eye's twitching, if you can see it. If you can't, can you see it? Jamie decides to stay because they're very invested in what's going on. Then there's a character named, I think it's Kata, it's C-A-T-A. So she's 16, she is one of the main narrators of both books. So that's what I was gonna say, is there's two subjects in the first book, The books are on the table, you probably can't see, but that's what I'm doing here. So there's 2 subjects in the first book that are narrators, and then there's also 2 subjects in the next book that are narrators, and Kata is one narrator in each of them, but the second person switches. I would consider her the main character because it says sleep comes easily for most people, but it's an impossible dream for Kata, Fergus, and the 5 other teens, blah, blah, blah. Fergus is another main character, but I always considered Kata the main character, which maybe is because I'm a girl. Fergus is 18, and other than like physical descriptions, I can't think of any way to describe him. He's a really nice guy, he's smart. I don't know what else to say. So then we have Ant, who is the youngest. Ant is 12. A very important character or crucial to the story, more so in the second book, but do not underestimate them, because then there's somebody named Sinclair. He's just, no, you don't want to be associated with Sinclair. Janelle's last name is Sinclair. Sinclair is just one of those people who he thinks he's just like hot crap. He thinks he's all that in a bag of chips, the best thing since sliced bread, however you want to say it. He thinks that everybody's in love with him, and he's like super sassy and rude, and he thinks that it's charming, and which normally I like characters like that. Like Jace Wayland, for example. Or I talked about Nox in the Dorothy Must Die one. Characters like that are just kind of like sassy, but still have a human part in them. But Sinclair is just the rudest person by far in this book. Then there's a girl named George. She's just sassy. She's kind of emo. They talk about her being like really blunt cut, black hair and bangs, and just kind of dresses like grunge. So again, very sassy and very protective of Ant. And then we have Remy. Remy is Remy from Ratatouille. Remy, again, I'm trying to like think of character traits. Definitely speaks his mind. He's a nice guy, but yeah, anyways, he's gone through some things that make him the way that he is, which I mean all of them have, but that's all I can really say without giving things away. But he's just kind of like a middle character. I don't hate him, but I don't love him. And then the last character I'm going to talk about is Bethan. Bethan is really skinny, blonde. Again, these are the things that I don't know how else to describe her. She can be confusing sometimes, I found, and she's definitely a fighter. She's not to be underestimated. Some things that I loved about this book, first of all, was Jamie. Having somebody on the outside, seeing what the scientists were thinking, how they were planning on fixing it, things like that, I found really interesting. Because when you're in it, you're just seeing what they're going through, and they're always wondering like, oh, I wonder what's happening on the outside, and I wonder what's happening with our bodies and things like that. And so Jamie being on the outside was good to be able to see both perspectives. It also made it clearer of how it would be possible for this to happen. I will say, like, I'm no doctor, but they did incorporate a lot of science and health into it that made it seem like this is fully plausible to happen. And I found it interesting because people always talk about we don't know what happens when other people are in comas, that kind of thing. So another good thing about Jamie is that they give really unbiased opinions about what's happening and what should be done next, that kind of thing. The last thing I will say about this book, about something I really loved, is that it deals with so many issues. It deals with guilt, eating disorders, family violence, genetic conditions, autism spectrum, OCD, etc. Something that I didn't love about this book was that there's so many plot twists. Now, I'm a sucker for plot twists. I love a good plot twist, but there's so many that it became very confusing at the end. There was a lot in the first book, and that became confusing to me when I went to read the second book because it had been over a year. That is the other thing I didn't really like about this book, is that sometimes I get annoyed if I read 2 books back to back and there's a bunch of recap on the first one. Now I have a whole different idea on that because the second book had no recap at all. It is just a continuation of the first story. I feel like it could have all been done in one book. Obviously it would have been a larger book. and I do like smaller books personally, but this was the kind of thing where when there's no recap and it jumps like from one scene right to the next at the start of the second book, I feel like it could have just been one book and it might have been a little bit simpler for me to read, and I might have enjoyed it more just because I spent a lot of time when I was getting into the second book confused and Googling things and trying to remember what happened in the first one without having to reread the whole thing. Even though I said I might have liked it more if it was one book, I still am gonna give this series, this 2-book series, 5 stars. I would probably read it again for many reasons. It was very descriptive, such as certain nightmares that happen. Like I said, it's a very unique topic. It was heavily crafted characters, even though like I'm struggling to think of characteristics, which I will explain in a minute why. And the different nightmare scenarios made it feel like you were reading a bunch of books in one. I'm gonna give some examples. I'm not gonna say whose nightmares they were, so it's not gonna spoil anything. A combination of horror movies was one of my favorites, which if you start reading this book, you'll know immediately whose dream that it's gonna be, so sorry. There's a character in this book who is a horror movie fanatic, but it was so cool to read that one because it started with like all these zombies chasing them and they get to a graveyard and people are climbing out of the graves, and then they're like running through the forest trying to get away and they can hear the chainsaw from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I love horror movies, so it was really cool to read. And then it said like, this is more of a mainstream one for those of you who don't really like horror movies, but you'll know what I'm talking about when it's like a red balloon kind of peeks out from behind a tree and then there's just a clown's face that like kind of peeked out and then went back in and it was Pennywise, but that was all they talked about Pennywise. Like it was just a big combination of all the horror movies, and I thought that that one was so cool. Similar books, this is a new edition that I added with the Dorothy Must Die one. It's very unfortunate because, like I said, this is such a unique topic. I can't actually think of any books that are very similar. So I agree with the author's idea of a combination of Flatliners. I've never seen The Matrix, but I know kind of what it's about. And then Nightmare on Elm Street. Obviously, not even just because of the horror movie Dream, but just because it is kind of a horrifying topic. So, okay, so that is all I'm gonna say for my non-spoiler review. If you think you're interested in reading this book, which I would highly encourage, even though I would love it if you'd watch the whole video. Most people are trying to say, oh, stay to the end for blah, blah, blah. But this is such a good book. Again, this is Dreamfall by Amy Plum. And I am now going to get into my spoiler section. So please, 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 if you don't want to read this, click off now. And I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.
Spoilers.
Spoiler.
Okay, now, if you were here, you don't think you're gonna read this book, you might read it, but you want the spoilers for some reason. Maybe you just like me that much. It's fine. You find out that it's basically based on REM and non-REM sleep. So, let me explain. There ends up being 50 minutes of dream time and 20 minutes of void time. So that's basically flipped. So I guess when they did this experiment, when this experiment started, the whole point was that they wanted to do a cycle of REM and non-REM sleep, and that was what the original idea was supposed to be before everything went to crap. In the Dreamfall, it's actually flipped. So there's 50 minutes where they're dreaming and 20 minutes where they're in this place called the Void, which is basically a big expanse, like can't see anything. Basically, they get sucked into this big portal and that's what takes them into the dream from the Void. But the only way to get out of the dream and get back into the Void is to also, again, jump through this portal, but the portal doesn't suck them in this time, like they have to race to get to it. And so that's the thing, is you can't avoid the dreams, but you really want to get it. Get it, avoid. That was like a you joke.
Thanks.
So in the first book, you get used to that character George, like I was talking about, who's kind of like an alternative emo girl, however you want to say it. Turns out, George isn't real. They realize a little bit into the second book that like how other people see you in this Dreamfall is how you see yourself. So Ant sees themselves as a really quiet person. Ant is the one who's on the autism spectrum and has OCD, and that's part of the reason that they become such a big character. I will get into that though. But basically then they see George, who's like their protector. It's a little bit like DID, and then you find out that George isn't real. And George is actually a figment of Ant's imagination. And so eventually, like throughout the book, George does end up like disappearing, basically. Like I said, that is the thing about this book. So some of the things that I might say are a combination of things that happen in both, like what I'm about to say. So in the first book, there's this thing called the static monster. It's shaped like a person, but it's all staticky and you can't really see anything. At first they think that the monster is trying to keep them from the void, but actually he's trying to get into the void. They end up finding later on in the second book that it's actually one of the sleep studies named Brett, and he has I think it's familial fatal insomnia maybe, and it's like over time his brain is deteriorating because he cannot sleep, which is why his consciousness is all messed up, which is why he gets shown as kind of like a static monster. Over time, it more comes out in the second book. The dreams are getting longer and the void time is getting smaller, so their rest time. So it ends up being like 51 minutes and then 19 minutes and then 52, 18, etc. And so their bodies are deteriorating over time. They're getting more tired, like on the outside world kind of thing, which you're seeing from the researcher's point of view. That is one thing where I say that Ant is a very important character. Ant is able to use their pulse and like tell how many minutes have passed kind of thing. Ant is the first one who realizes that the void time is getting smaller and just doesn't really tell anybody at first. The two narrators on the inside are Kata and Fergus, and the two narrators on the inside of the second one are Kata and Ant, which is very important because Ant is the one kind of figuring out everything. Ant is really like the one that carries them through this whole thing. You find out in the first one that if somebody dies in the dream, they die in real life. But if they get horribly injured in the dream, but are alive until they get into the void like heals them. Like they're completely fine once they get into the void, no matter what happened to them in the dream. The reason this comes to light is that unfortunately, one of the characters does end up dying in the first book. It's Bethan. So like I said earlier, I was having trouble thinking of character traits, and that's partially because it was so long ago I read the first book and she died in it that I don't really remember a whole lot about her, same as George. I just read up a little bit on them, but she does end up dying. I think she gets shot in the war zone, which is Remy's dream. He grew up in a war zone, I think it was Afghanistan, and so his whole family died and he was the only one that got out, so he definitely has some survivor's guilt from that, which is important for something later on, but anyways. So yes, Bethan does end up dying in the war zone. I believe she gets shot. Fergus also gets shot. That kind of makes it back to the void in time. But so what happens is Bethan wakes up for a minute in the real world, and so then you see, this is why it's good to have Jamie on the outside. You see it from Jamie's point of view, and Jamie's leaning over her, and I don't remember what she says. She says something about the war zone and getting shot and things like that, and then she dies. Fergus also gets shot, like I said, and he's like obviously right on the brink of dying because he wakes up and he says, "Is Bethan okay?" That's kind of the first hint of Jamie's. Jamie says, "No, she died," and Jamie also says, "You need to be careful. There's somebody in the dream with you that's a psychopath." Jamie has been looking at all of their files basically and finds out that one of them is a dangerous psychopath. Fergus falls back into the coma, doesn't know who it is. I wish that we also didn't know who it was, because the whole second book is them trying to figure out who the psychopath is, which is so frustrating to me because I know who it is. And I feel like it's so obvious, but I guess that's the point of a psychopath, is they make it hard for you to tell. The psychopath is Sinclair, which is why I said you don't want to be associated with Sinclair.
Great.
The researchers think that Jamie's crazy to be assuming the REM and non-REM sleep and all the dreams, and that they're sharing a consciousness because the waves aren't shown up, and it's like, no, they're in a coma, they have no brain waves, whatever. Jamie really, really, really believes their theory, but the researchers end up not trusting Jamie because they think oh, what, you're an intern, and which, when you think about it, obviously what the things that Jamie's thinking are crazy to think about, but from the people inside the dreams that it is happening. So that's obviously frustrating, but frustrating for Jamie too. So basically they kick Jamie out of the lab and they say you're done here, you're just confusing us, you're wasting our time, that kind of thing. Basically they've now all had a nightmare, I think, in the first one. In the second one, they start again, the cycle starts again. So in Remy's second nightmare, they're in a place near like military encampment kind of thing. When the void is coming, when the portal thing is coming, there's 3 booms, so like huge, like big thunder cracks almost. The void ends up coming, and of course there's this huge like explosion sound, and so the military people start freaking out, leave them all there, so like perfect. There's this big watchtower, and there's a big fence that has barbed wire at the top, and the void is on the other side of the wall. So they said like, we don't have time to climb over it, and we don't have time to dig under it, and so like, what do? So they climb up into the watchtower, and their plan is to jump over the fence, but they can't get to the void, so they're gonna have to land on the ground. They basically all do that, but first Sinclair is up in the watchtower with Remy and is saying something to him and just killed one of the guards. That's one of the things. There's one guard that's still up there, and they're like, how are we gonna get past him? Sinclair walks up, shoots him in the head, kills him. And they're all like, but he's like, guys, like this isn't real, and this is all dreams. And so they're like, yeah, I guess, but I feel like there was another way to do it, like that kind of thing. You can see Sinclair talking to Remy, and then Sinclair leads them all up. So they all go up the watchtower, jump over the edge. All of them break bones when they fall. It's like a 30-foot drop, and all of them break something. But that's the thing, is that once they get to the void, they know they'll be fine. So they basically supremely injure themselves, and then all have to kind of crawl to get to this wall thing. So right as they're about to go through, Remy turns around and sees Brett, the static monster, who wants to get to the void, and he's surrounded by all these military soldiers, and he's kind of pointing and trying to show them where it is, but because this is a dream, the soldiers don't really like see the wall, so they don't understand what he's doing. They think he's just trying to escape, whatever. And Remy ends up feeling really bad, and he's like, no, like we need to help him, like now we know who this is a patient same as us. And so he runs to go help him, and they shoot Brett and kill him, and then Remy starts screaming because he's upset and says no, and then they see him and also shoot him. So Remy ends up dying as well. That's the thing where it flips to the real world now, and Jamie's there and is seeing, and Brett dies and Remy dies. Remy says something to Jamie that also makes Jamie think, okay, this is totally what's happening. They all are sharing the same dreams, that kind of thing. But after that, they kind of forget about Brett. That's the weird thing, is so much of the first half of the second book was figuring out what is up with the static monster. The first book is just like, scary, no. The second book is more them trying to figure out what's happening, the first half of it. But then once he dies, they just don't really like think anything of it. Comes to light that Sinclair is the psychopath. And there's a couple reasons it does that I'm not gonna get into because it does spoil some things. I know this is the spoiler section, but still, it's just like, there's just so much that happened. But basically Sinclair has killed people in the past, like in the real life, but not directly, like not shot anybody. But an example was, there was a girl who was really suicidal, and he became her friend and gave her like poison to kill herself, and basically like egged her on and told her that she should do it. And that happened with like a couple different people, where like things like that happen, where he's like, yeah, but I didn't actually kill them. Like he's just got a weird way of thinking of things. Bethan is one of the people who has a lot of guilt. She died in the first book, like I said. Bethan was watching her, and she, I think she went to the bathroom or something, and her sister fell into the pool and drowned. So Bethan has a lot of guilt over that. So basically when Bethan dies in the first of Remy's nightmares, Sinclair was telling her like, oh, it was all your fault, and basically guilting her into it. And so then she wanted the rest of them to get out, and so she sacrificed herself, or it's either something like that, or she got shot just because she didn't want to live anymore because he made her feel so awful. And you find out that with Remy, what happened when they were up in the watchtower is he was saying things about how like, oh yeah, and your whole family died and you don't even care because you survived, and like that must really suck, and all these things like that, which is why he didn't want to let Brett die, because he felt so much survivor's guilt over his family. So again, Sinclair egged him on with that, which is why then Remy basically killed himself, because he didn't want Brett to die and him not to die. So Jamie, like I said, got kicked out of the lab, but ends up sneaking back in and essentially unplugs this tower they're all attached to, and so like has this idea that they can die and then come back to life, and that's how they'll get out. So puts them all into cardiac arrest and then shocks them back to life, and they actually all make it out, and that is how the book ends. But so then when the researchers come back and they're like, what the heck are you doing here? We told you to leave, and like, did you do this? Jamie says, oh no, I came in and the tower was unplugged, and so like I had forgotten my bag here. That's the only reason I'm back, and like all this stuff. You find out like at the very end of the book, I think it's in the epilogue, that they all end up coming out, and including Sinclair. But in the last dream that happens at the end of the book, it was one of Sinclair's nightmares, and it was basically all of the people that he has made commit suicide, and they all hold him there and like prevent him from going into the void and escaping one last time. However, because of the medical part of it, like he is shocked and brought back to life. So at first he does wake up, but then he falls back into the coma, and it says that eventually his parents pull his life support. So he does end up dying, and it's essentially supposed to be because of all of the people in his mind. So like Bethan is there, and Remy's there, and all the people in the past that he has done awful things to and basically made them commit suicide, they're all there, and they prevent him from escaping and living. It ends in Jamie's point of view, and basically the experiments have been shut down. Now those researchers are working on the genetic condition that affected Brett, and everybody that lived is doing well. So I think the only people that made it out are Fergus, Aunt, Kata. So that was this book. So my final thoughts are, even if you've watched this far, if you think that sounds interesting, I would still say to read it, which I know sounds ridiculous, but there's so many little things that I didn't say because there's no way I could say all of them. And the nightmares are so vivid and descriptive that it's like so many books in one. It's still definitely worth a read, even if you've heard all of these spoilers. And the little nightmares that they're in are like so cool to experience, in my opinion. So yeah, I think that that's it for this review. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think of this book, if you think it'd be interesting. If you only, oh, no, they wouldn't know that. I was gonna say if you stopped before the spoiler part, but then you wouldn't be watching this, never mind. If you think you still might watch it, or if you can think of another book that this reminds you of. And I think that that's everything. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys next time. Bye guys.
Cool movie.
Literally.